The crown prince lifted the red wedding veil from my head and sneered in disgust. "So, it was you who saved me? What an ugly sight," he said. Just looking at me made him sick. The crown princess scolded me for being vulgar and ordered my kneecaps to be carved out. A bowl of bone broth was then sent to my parents at the border. For 5 years, I couldn't draw my bow, couldn't ride my horse, and could no longer see the endless desert of my memories. On the day my parents hanged themselves, I set fire to the Eastern Palace. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the day I saved the crown prince. The prairie prince declared loudly, "You won, but you may only take one captive with you." The crown prince ordered coldly, "Hurry up and get me out of this wretched place." Without hesitation, I pointed at someone. He is the true crown prince of Daliang. I lost count of how many times Wei Shi had come to this dark chamber. A black veil covered my eyes. He said softly, "Don't be afraid. It won't hurt for long." I wasn't afraid of pain, but the moment a steel blade gouged out my kneecap, I still bit through my tongue. A total of 137 cuts. Sticky, icy blood pooled on the ground. Each time, Wei Shi would come up with new ways to torture me. Seeing me curl up in agony, unable to make a sound, he frowned and said soothingly, "Z had a nightmare last night and has been overly anxious. These legs are useless to you now, better to rid you of the pain." I stared into his eyes, my lips trembling as I begged, "Wei Shi, just kill me. All I wanted was to die." But Wei Shi only smiled. "That can't be right. Is this all the strength the mighty border general of Daliang has?" For 2 years, he used my parents' lives to keep me from dying too easily. Wei Shi hated me so much, only because I had made his beloved suffer. The current crown princess, Yi, had once been with Wei Shi for years without a title or status. 5 years ago, I saved Wei Shi, who was already the crown prince, from the hands of the prairie raiders. But on the journey back to the capital, we were ambushed by bandits. At the most critical moment, I shielded Wei Shi. A bandit's axe split open my mask, leaving a long, jagged scar across my face. The wound was so deep it exposed the bone, impossible to heal completely. Upon hearing this, His Majesty publicly praised my loyalty before the entire court and granted me a marriage decree with the crown prince. The emperor's will could not be defied. For 2 years in the Eastern Palace, Wei Shi stripped me of all my martial skills. He said, "A woman should be gentle and demure. Shenlong, you're already ugly. Handling weapons like a common soldier only makes you more disgraceful." I refused to yield. So Wei Shi smiled and threatened, "Whether your parents live or die depends entirely on my mood." I swallowed the pill he gave me and endured a night of excruciating pain. Then, when the emperor fell gravely ill and appointed Wei Shi as regent, he no longer bothered to pretend. Without hesitation, he deposed me and married Yi, the daughter of a Hanlin Academy scholar. The 2 years of marriage between me and Wei Shi became a stain on the now highly regarded crown princess. She begged Wei Shi to carve out my kneecaps, boil them into a broth, and secretly send it to my parents at the border. Smiling, she told them, "This was made from your daughter's bones." My mother lost her mind upon hearing this. Yi vividly described the scene to me. "Shenlong, you were once the crown princess. How could you have a mother who acts like a deranged old woman?" I clenched my teeth so hard I nearly shattered them. There was no sunlight in the dark chamber. Standing above me, she sneered, "A mere borderland general dares to fight me for His Highness? Let me tell you a secret. The bandits that attacked you on your way to the capital? I sent them. Now, you can rot in this wretched place with that hideous face of yours." Later, word came from the border. My parents, unable to bear the humiliation, had hanged themselves. That night, Wei Shi came to see me. For once, there was a trace of pity in his expression. "Z did go a little too far this time, Shenlong. I will make it up to you," he promised as if bestowing charity. Afraid I would ask for too much and harm his beloved, I wanted nothing from him. That night, I overturned a candle. The fire raged through half the Eastern Palace, turning it into my final tomb. All my life, I had been loyal to my country, risking death for Daliang time and again. Yet, in the end, I was destroyed by the schemes of a woman in the inner court. As the flames burned, my vision blurred, but the sight of the endless desert grew clearer and clearer. When I opened my eyes again, the sunlight was blinding. Instinctively, I raised my hand to shield my eyes, and found that, apart from the calluses left by years of training, my hands bore no trace of the torture inflicted by Yi Zi's maids. My legs were whole and unharmed. Before me was a familiar military tent. Just then, someone rushed in, reporting urgently, "General, the Crown Prince refused to listen and insisted on going hunting outside the city. He's been captured by the prairie warriors." The man was Ma Zi, one of my former subordinates. I was momentarily dazed. He was still alive, or rather, had I been reborn? Soon, an order arrived from above, commanding me to lead an army to rescue the Crown Prince. The soldiers in the tent murmured among themselves, "General, what does our Crown Prince even look like?" Hulu smacked his lips. "I heard he's so pretty, he looks like a woman." A fleeting image of Wei Shi's refined features flashed through my mind. Given this second chance at life, how could I possibly save him? I deliberately waited until dawn before leading my troops to the prairie. The wind howled as the Prairie King, Changmu, displayed a massive iron cage in the open wilderness. The captives inside had been stripped of their outer robes, left trembling in the cold. In the very center, clad in nothing but a thin layer of clothing, was the Crown Prince, Wei Shi. Even without his royal garments, his beauty remained undeniable. Just like in my past life, Changmu challenged me to an archery contest. "Shunlan, if you win, you may take the merchant captives with you. If you lose," he grinned, "I will kill them all." Just as I had in my previous life, I accepted the challenge. The arrow from Changmu shot through the air. At the same time, the arrow in my hand left the bowstring. 100 paces away, just like in my past life, my arrow split the tail of Changmu's and struck the bullseye. The bowstring trembled slightly against my thumb. It felt right. I was back where I belonged. Changmu sat tall on his horse. A moment ago, he had been all smiles, but now his tone shifted. "General Shen, you can only take one person." With a wave of his hand, the grassland warriors raised their arrows in unison, aiming at the captives in the cage. Wei Shi's expression flickered with panic. Even so, inside the cage, he calmly straightened his robe and fixed his pitch-black eyes on me, his voice cold as he commanded, "Take me away from this wretched place. Now." In his panic, he had exposed his identity. I glanced at the massive cage in the distance, looking again and again, utterly pleased. Then, I casually pointed to a captive curled up in the corner and shouted, "He is the Crown Prince of Daliang. Shunlan, I am the true heir to the throne." Wei Shi's face twisted in shock at my words. But the next moment, a prairie warrior hurled a stone at him, knocking him unconscious. On the way back, Ma Zi muttered, "Do you think the general picked the wrong person? That kid didn't look much like a prince to me." "You think the general is as blind as you?" Hulu scoffed, as if she'd bring back a fake crown prince. In my past life, after I was deposed as the crown prince's consort, Ma Zi, Hulu, and the others went to the capital to defend my honor. Wei Shi had them executed for desertion. I thought for a moment before replying honestly, "That person is indeed not the Crown Prince of Daliang." Ma Zi and Hulu fell into a long silence. Then, in unison, they lifted their heads and praised, "The general must have her reasons." In my past life, Wei Shi betrayed loyal ministers and slaughtered the righteous. How many souls had died by his hands? Tens of thousands? I had no intention of hiding the truth from these brothers who had fought beside me. I led my troops, escorting the so-called Crown Prince back to the capital. Unexpectedly, the next day, a woman arrived at my camp, claiming to be Yi Zi. The men had spent years stationed at the border and had rarely seen women. When they heard she was crying and demanding to see the Crown Prince, threatening that he would have them all executed if they delayed, I realized, so in my past life, the crown prince had taken her along on his journey to the frontier. Yi stood inside the military tent, dressed in plain robes. She faltered slightly at the sight of the people following behind me, but quickly lifted her chin haughtily. I heard an amusing story from His Highness. The general guarding the border is actually a woman named Shenlan. So, it's you? Her gaze landed on the mask covering my face, and she sneered, "Hiding your ugly face, I see." She demanded to see the crown prince, so I had someone take her to him. A quarter of an hour later, she returned, her face ashen. She must have seen that ragged, shackled slave. "Shenlan, how dare you try to fool me with an impostor? Where did this stray dog come from? Barking in my camp?" I dug a finger into my ear. Yi froze, her gaze locking onto my mask. Then, suddenly, she laughed and turned to the soldiers in the tent. "The true crown prince is still trapped in enemy hands. And yet you blindly follow a woman like Shenlan? Do you know how many noble women in the capital are more powerful than her? Isn't this utterly ridiculous?" Lu caught her insinuation immediately. Ma Zi grew interested. "Miss, can these noble ladies of the capital wield an 80-pound war hammer?" Yi was momentarily confused. "Of course not." "Then what nonsense are you spouting? Who could possibly be stronger than our general?" The soldiers in the tent glared at her in anger. This ignorant woman doesn't know her place. She bit her lip hard, shaking like a leaf. Still, she stubbornly pointed at me. "Shenlan, do you realize your crime?" I lifted a hand. "Take her away." 10 lashes. As Yi was dragged off, peace finally returned to my ears. But I only dared to give her 10 strikes. After all, I feared this delicate noblewoman wouldn't last much longer under my hand. That night, I was jolted awake by a nightmare. Ever since my men discovered that the captive wasn't the real Daliang crown prince and bore the branding of a prairie slave, they had treated him even worse. The soldiers of Daliang harbored deep hatred for the grassland people. On the road, they locked him in a cage and taunted him with a piece of raw meat dangling from a poplar branch. "Little wolf pup, wanna eat? If you do, bow your head and beg." Under the moonlight, I approached the tent where the captive was being held. He was curled up in a corner, his hair tangled and his face filthy. Through the dim light, I could see that the shackles on his ankles had cut so deep into his flesh that bone was visible. His rough, tattered clothing was stained with mud and blood. At the sound of footsteps, his fingers trembled slightly. As I bent down to hand him something, he suddenly bit down on my hand with his sharp little teeth. As he looked up, the coldness in his eyes faded into a trace of panic. "I am not your crown prince of Daliang." Beneath his sharply arched brows, his amber eyes gleamed like cool jade. If he were washed clean, he would be a rather handsome young man. I lifted his chin, pressing his right hand against the wall. His breathing grew heavier, yet he clenched his lips shut, maintaining a stubbornly resigned posture. The movement caused his loose collar to fall slightly open. Noticing my gaze, he turned his face away, embarrassment flickering in his eyes. I lowered my gaze instinctively. "I know you're not the crown prince, but for now you have no choice but to be. If you play along, I will grant you one promise once this is over." He curled his lips into a smile, locking eyes with me. Suddenly, he asked, "If Aji does as General Sister says, will I die in the end?" I fell silent, not answering his question. "Try this. It's good when cooked." I tossed him a piece of roasted beef and walked away. Wei Shi referred to himself as Gu, in front of the prairie people. A prince of Daliang held considerable value. How could the prairie people not recognize that? In my past life, before he could speak, I had used my inner strength to knock him unconscious with a pebble, claiming he was merely a wealthy merchant from Daliang. That was how I managed to take him away. Now, with this young slave playing the role of the prince in my army, I had enough time to carry out my plan. Once the truth was exposed, His Majesty wouldn't immediately take my life. The prairie people, though weakened, had been causing trouble for years, and the border still needed someone to guard it. Even Wei Shi had taken nearly 5 years to replace the key generals at the border with his own men. But after returning to the capital, if His Majesty wanted to punish me without executing me, he would need a justification that satisfied the court. A scapegoat. After all, as a mere border general, it was reasonable that I had never seen the crown prince before and had been deceived by an impostor. This slave boy was destined to die. Upon reaching the border city, I stalled for time day after day, spreading the word that the prince was injured and required rest. Yi Zi, still recovering from her wounds, was desperate to return to the capital and deliver a message. I detained her on suspicion of colluding with the enemy. The prince is trapped in enemy hands? And who can prove your claim? Besides, how would a noble lady from the capital end up in this bitterly cold borderland? Unless, of course, Missy has already privately pledged herself to His Highness? Yi Zi fell silent. She dared not argue further on this matter. If word spread and the court learned she had traveled with the prince, her reputation would be ruined. After 2 failed attempts, she finally wised up, ate her meals properly, and carried herself with a look of determined endurance. About a month later, the first snowfall blanketed the border city. I received a letter. There were only 3 words. It is done. The next day, the real crown prince was sent back. According to Wei Shi, he had outwitted the prairie people and escaped on his own. By the time my men reported to me, Wei Shi had already arrived at the border city. Inside the flickering candlelit hall, he stood with his hands behind his back, draped in luxurious robes, seemingly the same noble prince as before. I stepped into the room. Outside, the sharp crack of a whip suddenly rang out. Wei Shi's face turned pale, and he instinctively tried to kneel, only to realize his mistake and, in embarrassment and fury, climb back to his feet. His gaze toward me burned with rage. "Shenlan, how dare you?" It seemed Long Mu had done a fine job of teaching him this past month. Feigning innocence, I clasped my hands in salute. "Your Highness, what do you mean? Your humble servant does not understand." His brows furrowed, as if searching my face for any sign of deception. I took a step forward, speaking with sincerity. "News from the capital says that while Your Highness was recovering at the border, the second prince has been making quite a few moves." Wei Shi's eyes flickered, his gaze lingering on my mask. Then suddenly he smiled meaningfully. "When we return to the capital, I will grant you the position of concubine." Feigning dissatisfaction, I replied, "Your Highness, I have defended this border with great effort and merit. A mere concubine's title, is that supposed to impress me?" "Then what do you want?" From behind a screen, a trembling figure emerged. Dressed in plain white, Yi Zi moved like a delicate willow swaying in the wind. Somehow, she had procured rouge from somewhere in the border city, and even her long lashes shimmered with tears. "Z? What are you doing here?" A flash of panic crossed Wei Shi's eyes. Tears welled up as Yi Zi clung to his chest, releasing all her pent-up grievances without a single word. "Z, you've suffered. Why didn't you return to the capital?" Wei Shi gently stroked her hair and sighed. "My parents thought only of Your Highness's well-being, which is why they sent me to accompany you. As long as Your Highness remains absent, I will wait here in this bitter cold land. Even if it means waiting until my hair turns white, I will wait without regret." I knew what was coming next. Right after this affectionate exchange, she would make her accusation. Sure enough, after sobbing for a while, she suddenly turned to me. "Your Highness, with your noble status, that slave must be a spy from the prairie. How dare he impersonate the prince? He should be executed by dismemberment." She lowered her head, pretending to be confused. "But what I don't understand is, how could a mere slave be so bold?" Even General Shin was fooled. Wei Shi had already been suspicious. Now his eyes darkened, turning cold as he looked at me. "I will personally skin him alive." I stopped him, making up a story on the spot. "It's not that I was completely unaware, but that slave named Ji has a rather special identity. I have been investigating him. Before we returned to the capital, I will give your highness a full explanation. If my suspicions are correct, not only will your highness be innocent, but you may even earn merit for this. Hearing the implication in my words, Wei Shi hesitated. I met his gaze and continued. His Majesty received a letter from the border reporting that the Crown Prince had been taken captive and was recovering in the borderlands. He immediately dispatched officials to verify the matter. But it has already been a month, and those officials have yet to arrive. If not for this delay, this whole act of deception would have already been exposed, and your highness would never have suffered at the hands of the prairie people. Wei Shi's position as crown prince was not secure. In my past life, it was only after marrying me that he slowly gained influence, starting with the military and gradually winning over the court. It must be that bastard second prince's doing. Wei Shi gritted his teeth in anger. The second prince, Wei Zhouchen? Seeing that Wei Shi's attention had shifted to his rival, Yi Zi was unwilling to let me off so easily. Your Highness, the frost and snow outside are so beautiful, I suddenly feel inspired to paint. She clapped her hands, gazing at the plum tree in the courtyard with a charming smile. The heavy snow weighed down the branches, and the general knelt beneath the plum tree, praying for blessings. Your Highness, I would like to personally paint this scene for you and present it as a gift, wishing you great success in your ambitions, Yi Zi said. Wei Shi was momentarily stunned but immediately understood her implication. She wanted me to be the kneeling general in her painting. She was just as she had been in my previous life, always knowing how to torment people with insidious means, yet maintaining an innocent facade. I curled my lips in a cold smile, suddenly finding it ironic. In my past life, I had spent so much time wondering what was wrong with me, why Wei Shi, my supposed closest companion, would torment me like that. Mother once said that women in this world were like drifting boats, dependent on nothing. She wished for me to find a good match, someone I could rely on. But after everything I had been through in my past life, I understood the truth better than anyone. Women do not need to rely on anyone to live. I would take control of my own destiny. Your Highness, are you unwilling? Yi Zi tugged at the corner of his robe, her eyes slightly red. Wei Shi took her hand in return and looked at me indifferently. General Shen, praying for Liang is an honor for you. Kneel outside. He casually pointed to the plum tree outside. Yes. I lowered my head and withdrew. It was too soon to reveal my hand. The snow had stopped, but the wind in the border town remained piercingly cold. I knelt under the red plum tree, snow piling onto my knees. A servant brought paper and brush, and Yi Zi made a few half-hearted strokes on the blank scroll before coughing delicately into her hand. Wei Shi personally brought her hot tea, his voice filled with concern. Zi, I understand your devotion to me. Why torment yourself like this? She sipped the tea and lowered her gaze, looking pitiful. I'm truly useless. Just a little painting, and I already feel fatigued. Your Highness, why don't we rest for a while in the inner chamber before continuing? Her cheeks flushed with implication. Wei Shi was clearly tempted, his gaze darkening with desire, and he immediately helped her inside. The snow was freezing, numbing my legs, but I could not leave. Wei Shi's words still lingered in my mind. Though he wanted to cooperate with me, he still resented the fact that I had not saved him from the steppe raiders. For a whole month, he had suffered greatly in captivity. His hatred for me would not fade so easily. That was why he was using Yi Zi tonight to punish me. If I resisted, I would only give him more reason to act against me. After tonight, no matter how it was spun, it would be dismissed as nothing more than a woman's petty tantrum. Footsteps approached. Someone stopped in front of me. From the corner of my eye, I glimpsed slender ankles, but did not look up. You'd best stay out of sight. The Crown Prince believes the second prince is behind all this. If he sees you, even I won't be able to save you. The Crown Prince is punishing you because you didn't rescue him from the steppe raiders? The young man suddenly knelt before me, facing me directly. He held a black fox fur cloak in his hands, his sharp brows furrowed with stubbornness. You saved my life. If you want me dead, I'll go die. I remained silent. His amber eyes darkened. You don't have to endure this. Compared to the humiliation I had suffered in my past life, what was this? I lifted my gaze, a faint smile tugging at my lips. And why do you think I'm enduring it? I reached out and took the cloak from his hands. Naturally, because I am infatuated with the crown prince. When he sees me dressed so thinly tomorrow, he'll feel more pity for me. I shook out the cloak and draped it over his shoulders instead. My lips barely moved as I whispered, "Get lost. Or else I might hesitate when I need to use you in the future." His Adam's apple bobbed, his eyes flickering with an unreadable emotion. He rose to his feet and left, his steps unsteady. I couldn't help but sigh. Children were so easy to fool. Then I called out to Motsi, who had been hiding nearby to watch the spectacle. "Bring me a few more hand warmers." The lunatic inside was too busy enjoying himself to care about me. I didn't take the boy's words to heart. In my past life, Weishur had taught me through bitter experience that men's words were nothing but lies. The next morning, Weishur pushed open the door and paused when he saw me still kneeling under the tree. He walked up to me and ordered me to rise. "Xinqing, if you want to share in my success, you should at least let me vent my anger first. Only then can we work together properly, don't you think?" I shivered, my lips pale. "Yes, Your Highness, I dare not bear any resentment. I only wish to send you to hell." Fearing that the second prince would make a move along the way, Weishur ordered me to escort him back to the capital. As we neared Higuan Mountain, Yi Zi suggested abandoning the main road and taking the southwestern Yongyi mountain path instead. She reasoned that the official road was only 20 miles from the second prince's territory, which posed too great a risk. Her reasoning was well thought out. In my past life, I had come to the same conclusion. But how had Yi Zi arrived at this idea? Weishur's eyes flashed with admiration. She lifted her chin. "Xinqing is not the only remarkable woman in this world." I didn't argue, simply ordering, "Follow Miss Ye's excellent plan." Yi Zi had prepared a whole speech to convince my soldiers, but my easy agreement left her visibly displeased. In my past life, when I escorted the crown prince back from the border, Yi Zi had not accompanied us. She had been secretly sent ahead to the capital by Weishur. I had not seen her before we arrived. Then came the bandit attack. To protect the crown prince, I had been disfigured. The emperor had then decreed my marriage to Weishur. Looking back, if I hadn't been scarred back then, how could Yi Zi have been at ease allowing Weishur to marry me? At first, she must have intended for me to die at the hands of those bandits. But the area 20 miles ahead was not just the second prince's territory. Yi Zi's uncle was also the city commander of this small, remote town. This time, things might not go as she planned. During the journey, Motsi accidentally spilled soup on Yi Zi's clothes, forcing her to change into armor. For once, she did not complain, instead eagerly donning the military attire. Along the way, she lifted the curtain of the carriage she shared with the crown prince multiple times, secretly observing me. Excitement flickered in her eyes. Sure enough, as we passed a forested area, a group of bandits suddenly emerged from the woods and charged at us. To avoid suspicion, the crown prince had brought only a small entourage. We were disguised as a merchant caravan. The escorting soldiers were merely 5 li ahead and behind us. As long as we held out, reinforcements would arrive. Blades flashed and swords clashed. "Be careful not to scar Miss Ye's face." I took another mask from my waist and handed it to Yi Zi. She froze for a moment, then tossed it away in disgust. "Only the ugly need such things."
Just like in my past life.
The leader raised a short axe and swung it toward Weishur. A sudden, piercing scream rang out from the crowd. Before everyone's eyes, Yi Zi lunged forward. The axe struck her face, and blood gushed out instantly. The bandits. They seemed highly familiar with the terrain. The moment they spotted reinforcements in the distance, they swiftly retreated and disappeared. Yi Zi regained consciousness from her fainting spell. She lifted her hand, which was hanging off the bed, and saw me lighting a candle inside the room. "You?" She stared intently at the iron mask on my face, as if trying to discern something. I cupped my fists and said, Miss Ye's devotion to His Highness is truly admirable. To protect him, you sacrificed your appearance without hesitation. I am deeply moved. What? Yi Zi's voice broke. It was as if she had only just begun to feel the pain. She leaped barefoot off the bed in a frenzy, desperately searching for a bronze mirror. Outside, Wei Shi was berating the barefooted doctor for being useless. Hearing the commotion inside, he rushed in anxiously. Your Highness, that hurts so much. The moment Yi Zi saw Wei Shi, she burst into tears. She covered her face, her voice choked. As long as your Highness is safe, that's all that matters. If I could bear this suffering for your Highness, then it is my blessing. Out of the corner of her eye, she shot me a hateful glare and repeated the same words over and over. Clever of her. She knew just how to deepen Wei Shi's guilt. Otherwise, what else could she say? That she didn't willingly protect the crown prince? That someone pushed her forward? Or that the one who was supposed to be disfigured was me? Wei Shi was deeply moved. He consoled her. Once we return to the capital, I will search the world for the best doctors. Z, your face will be healed. She shrank weakly into Wei Shi's embrace, silently shedding tears. Then, as if something had occurred to her, she suddenly locked her gaze onto my mask. Z heard rumors from the border town that General Shin wears a mask to conceal an ugly face. I wonder what lies beneath it. Her voice trembled, laced with a sob. General Shin, don't be ashamed. I just want a bit of comfort. Seeing that Wei Shi did not object, she smirked triumphantly and ordered with an air of authority. I command you to take off your mask. I was momentarily stunned, utterly shocked by her deranged behavior. Your Highness, Z is but a frail woman. She has no power to command your subjects. Seeing my lack of response, Wei Shi's face darkened with anger. Shenlong, do you think I am entirely at your mercy on this journey back to the capital? He stepped forward, gripping my chin. In the next instant, he roughly tore off my mask. The iron mask clattered to the ground. Wei Shi was momentarily dazed. A flicker of astonishment crossed his eyes. How could this be? You just stood by and watched. Yi Zi suddenly cried out. Then, as if overwhelmed, her body went limp and she fainted. I bent down, picked up my mask, and put it back on. Perhaps Missy was frightened by my hideous face. Wei Shi seemed dazed, forgetting even to check on Yi Zi. Instead, he stammered. I didn't mean to blame you, Xinqing. His reaction was nothing short of ironic to me. My mother was renowned as the great beauty of 10 villages, and I inherited her looks. When war broke out at the border, the military struggled to recruit enough men. Some women joined the army as cooks. I took my mother's place when she fell ill. But my cooking gave the soldiers diarrhea, and I was thrown out of camp that very night. In the darkness, I found myself and a group of wounded soldiers surrounded in the forest by invading nomads. In the face of death, everyone wanted to survive. Using the terrain to my advantage, I led the soldiers in an ambush, fighting our way out. Marshal Chung, upon hearing the tale, made an exception and allowed me to join the army as a regular soldier. Perhaps I was born for battle. From a young age, I had no love for embroidery or finery. I begged my father for combat instructors instead. Later, when I became a general, Motzi and Hulu said my face wasn't intimidating enough. They kindly gifted me a mask and spread the rumor that I was hideous as a yaksha and possessed inhuman strength. In my past life, I saved the crown prince. The emperor, hoping to secure my allegiance, granted me marriage to Wei Shi. Wei Shi accepted the arrangement. It was simply a move in his game for the throne. Yi Zi's family lacked status. As long as the emperor lived, she was not powerful enough for Wei Shi to defy his father and make her his wife. Though he promised her that once he ascended the throne, he would make her his empress. She still feared that, even if we were only husband and wife in name, he and I might develop feelings over time. Rumors of my ugliness were just hearsay from the border. What could be more reassuring for her than seeing my face ruined? In my past life, The first time Yi saw my unmasked face, she sneered in disgust. So it's true. You really are a hideous, luckless wretch. By then, a ghastly scar had already marred my face. Flesh torn, features unrecognizable. Wei Shi always found me repulsive. Marrying me was a last resort. Using me was an act of patience. But I, Shenlong, a woman who rose to the rank of general, had fought my way up, life on the line, battle after battle. My worth was never something the world could define by beauty or ugliness. She repeatedly lifted the curtain of the carriage she shared with the crown prince, secretly glancing at me, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Sure enough, when we passed a secluded area hidden by the forest, a group of bandits suddenly emerged from the woods and charged at us. To avoid drawing attention, the crown prince had only brought a small entourage. We were disguised as a merchant caravan. The armed escort was stationed 5 miles ahead and behind us. If we could hold out for a while, reinforcements would arrive. Swords clashed and glinted in the sunlight. Just don't let Miss Ye's face get slashed. I retrieved another mask from my waist and handed it to Yi. She hesitated, then threw it aside in disdain. Only the ugly need such things.
Just like in my past life.
The leader of the bandits raised a short axe and swung it at Wei Shi. A sharp, piercing scream suddenly rang out from the crowd. Before everyone's eyes, Yi lunged forward. The axe slashed across her face, and in an instant, blood gushed like a fountain. The bandits. They seemed well acquainted with the terrain. Noticing reinforcements approaching in the distance, they swiftly fled. Yi regained consciousness from her fainting spell. She lifted her hand from where it hung off the bedside and caught sight of me lighting a candle in the room. You. She stared fixedly at the iron mask on my face, as if trying to see through it. I cupped my fists and said, Monsieur's devotion to His Highness is truly admirable. You sacrificed your looks to protect him. I greatly respect your loyalty.
What?
Yi blurted out, her voice trembling. It was as if she only now registered the pain. She jumped barefoot from the bed, frantically searching for a bronze mirror. Outside, Wei Shi was berating the barefoot doctor for his incompetence. Hearing the commotion inside, he rushed in anxiously. Your Highness, Z is in so much pain. The moment Yi saw Wei Shi, she burst into tears. Covering her face, she choked out, It's a relief that your Highness is unharmed. As long as you're safe, this suffering is nothing. It's my honor to bear this in your stead. From the corner of her eye, she shot me a resentful glare, repeating the same words over and over. She was clever, knowing how to deepen Wei Shi's guilt.
Otherwise, what could she say?
That she didn't willingly protect the crown prince? That someone had pushed her forward? That I was the one who should have been disfigured? Wei Shi, deeply moved, reassured her. When we return to the capital, I will seek out the finest doctors in the land. Z, your face will be healed. She curled up weakly in Wei Shi's arms, silently weeping. Then, as if something had crossed her mind, she stared intently at my mask. I've heard the people of the border say that General Shen wears a mask because of an unsightly face. I wonder what's hidden beneath it. She spoke with a trembling voice, laced with sobs. General Shen, don't feel inferior. I only seek a bit of solace. Seeing that Wei Shi did not object, she looked pleased with herself and arrogantly commanded, I order you to take off the mask. I was momentarily stunned, honestly, taken aback by her madness. Your Highness, Z is but a frail woman. In the end, she cannot command your subjects. Seeing that I remained unmoved, Wei Shi's expression darkened. Shenlong, do you think that just because I've given you some face, I now have to rely on you alone on the journey back to the capital? He stepped forward, gripping my chin. The next moment he ripped off my mask. The iron mask clattered to the floor. Wei Shi froze slightly, a flicker of astonishment flashing through his eyes. How could this be? You just stood by and watched. Yi suddenly cried out in disbelief. The next second, her body went limp and she fainted. I bent down, picked up my mask, and put it back on. I must have startled Miss Yi with my unsightly face. Wei Shi, seemingly dazed, didn't immediately check on Yi Zi. Instead, he stammered, "I didn't mean to blame you, Xin Qing." Seeing his reaction, I only found it laughable. My mother had been a renowned beauty. I inherited her looks. In the early days of the border wars, recruitment fell short. Some women joined the army to cook for the soldiers. I took my mother's place when she fell ill. But my cooking gave people diarrhea, so I was kicked out of camp that very night. Under the cover of darkness, I found myself trapped in the border forest with wounded, retreating soldiers, hunted by invading tribes. In the face of death, everyone fought to survive. Using the terrain, I set an ambush, leading the soldiers in a desperate fight. We escaped. General Cheng, intrigued by the tale, made an exception and let me enlist as a soldier. Perhaps I was born for the battlefield. Even as a child, I loved weapons over dresses and pestered my father to hire me the best martial arts instructors. Later, when I became a general, Motzi and Hulu said I didn't look intimidating enough and kindly gifted me a mask. They even spread rumors that I was hideous as a yaksha and possessed boundless strength. In my past life, I saved the crown prince and was rewarded. The emperor wished for him to win the loyalty of the border generals, so he arranged my marriage to Wei Shi. Wei Shi agreed. It was a strategic move in his path to the throne. Yi Zi's family lacked status. While the emperor lived, she wasn't enough for Wei Shi to defy his father and take her as his legitimate wife. Though he promised that once he ascended, he'd make her empress. Yi Zi feared that, even if our marriage was just for show, Wei Shi and I might grow fond of each other over time. My so-called ugliness was merely a rumor. Nothing could set her mind at ease more than having my face ruined. In my past life, when Yi Zi first saw my face beneath the mask, she had recoiled in disgust. "So you really are a hideous hag." By then, a jagged, ghastly scar marred my face. Flesh torn, my original features unrecognizable. To Wei Shi, I had always been repulsive. He married me out of obligation. He used me while biding his time. But I, Shen Lan, carved my place as a general with my own blood. I fought for it. I bled for it. My worth was never defined by mere appearances. Wei Shi feared that the longer he delayed, the more unexpected events could occur, so he was eager to return to the capital. He was certain that the bandits were the work of the second prince, Wei Zhouqing, and had no intention of lingering here to investigate further. Only by returning to the capital, his own territory, could he truly be at ease. However, Wei Shi was unaware that the capital had already changed. "Why are you still in the capital?" Before leaving for Beiguan, Wei Shi had arranged for officials loyal to him to request an imperial decree, sending the second prince, Wei Zhouqing, to oversee the construction of defensive fortifications in Wuqing to the south. Wuqing was far from the second prince's fief, and Wei Shi had stationed his own men there. Overseeing construction was a grueling task, and it would take at least a year or more before he could return to the capital. That was why, when I first mentioned that the second prince was in the capital, Wei Shi refused to believe it. At this moment, however, he still had no idea what had gone wrong. The second prince, who was supposed to be in Wuqing, was now standing at the city gates with an imperial decree, welcoming him into the palace. In my past life, by this time, the emperor's health was already failing. He was only holding on for another 2 years by relying on rare medicinal herbs. His Majesty summoned Wei Shi and me to the palace immediately. Wei Shi no longer had time to investigate further. The palace attendants led us into the Golden Hall. On the imperial throne, the emperor's face was already pallid. After we finished our formal greetings, the emperor suddenly spoke in a solemn tone. "I am pleased that the crown prince has returned safely. I intend to bestow marriage between the crown prince and General Shen." He raised his weary hand and added, "As for that impostor AG, he shall be executed by Ling Qi." Everything was the same as in my past life. And yet, everything was different. "Your Majesty, I do not wish to ruin a good match," I said. "The crown prince's safe return is not due to my efforts, but to someone else, the daughter of the Hamlin Academy scholar, Yi Zi. I then recounted, embellishing the tale, how Yi Zi had risked her life, even disfiguring herself, just to save the crown prince. After my account, the emperor sat in silence for a long time. When he looked at Wei Shi, his gaze was sharp and displeased. Zi was merely. Wei Shi looked uneasy. Silence. The emperor cut him off. Perhaps the idea of the crown prince secretly promising marriage to an official's daughter was too disgraceful. The emperor forced a smile. Grant the Yi girl the title of a concubine then. As for General Shun's concerns, we will discuss the marriage later. It seemed the emperor had no intention of abandoning this marriage. What I hadn't expected was that, in this lifetime, Wei Shi did not reject the marriage outright like he had before. Leaving the Golden Hall, Wei Shi suddenly grabbed my sleeve. "Your Highness, what is the meaning of this?" I feigned ignorance. Wei Shi, however, flew into a rage. "Shenlong, I'll be waiting for the day you kneel before me and beg." With that, he flung his sleeve and stormed off. Watching his furious figure retreat, I curled my lips into a mocking smile. Let's see just how much your so-called love is truly worth. The emperor granted me a residence in the capital and even planned a banquet in my honor, saying he wished for me to share in the imperial grace on behalf of the generals stationed at the border. The banquet was scheduled for 2 days later. 2 days. More than enough time for Wei Shi to realize that the capital was no longer the same as when he had left. After my rebirth, I carefully recalled the major events that had taken place in the capital in my past life and sent a letter by express courier to the second prince. The military coup in Yongzhou City, the Ministry of Revenue officials' embezzlement scandal, the secret locations where high-ranking officials bought and sold positions. These were all mere pieces of information. But if the second prince was clever enough, he could use them to solidify his position in the court. He handled things rather well. Many veteran officials who had long harbored resentment toward Wei Shi's past tyranny began shifting their allegiance toward the second prince. The banquet proceeded as planned. Wei Shi drank at his seat, but worry clouded his brow. Over the past 2 days, he had repeatedly tried to send the second prince to Wuqing to oversee construction, but the court officials strongly opposed it. One censor even rebuked him openly in court. "If you're so concerned about the city's defenses, why don't you go there yourself?" During the banquet, Duke of Chu, emboldened by alcohol, delivered an elaborate speech wishing for the prosperity of the Great Liang and presented the emperor with a rare, snow-white steed. The emperor, intrigued, wished to see it for himself. To create a dramatic effect, hundreds of lanterns inside the hall were extinguished by the imperial guards. Darkness enveloped the surroundings. A large cage, draped in black cloth, was silently wheeled into the hall. In the darkness, hushed murmurs filled the air. The beast tamer unlocked the iron chains and cracked his whip. As the lash struck the horse's back, a single, eerie blue light flickered to life. The horse reared up with a shrill neigh. Suddenly, a man tore at his own clothes, dropping to his knees, wailing, "Spare me, my lord. I was wrong. Please, don't feed me to the wolves." The lanterns flared back to life. The officials gasped, staring in shock at the man kneeling half-naked on the ground. The crown prince of Great Liang, Wei Shi. On his shoulder was a grayish-blue slave tattoo, a mark unique to the nomadic tribes of the steppe. As the court gasped in horror, Wei Shi finally snapped back to reality. He frantically shouted at them, "No, it's not what you think. It's not like that." The emperor, overcome with rage, immediately ordered the banquet to be halted. At that moment, it was the most satisfying moment of my rebirth. The Great Steppe's first prince, Changmu, had often repeated one phrase to Wei Shi: "A slave has no right to wear such fine clothing." With torture devices, he had taught Wei Shi, over and over again, how to obey. For an entire month, Changmu had methodically broken his will. On the journey back, I deliberately created a relaxed, comfortable environment for Wei Shi. Everyone flattered him, even I. The painful memories he had buried deep within himself, he thought they had been left behind. He had returned, still believing himself to be the untouchable crown prince. but cages, iron chains, whips, darkness. When these tormenting elements resurfaced one by one, the trauma Wei Shi had desperately buried exploded at that very moment in the imperial banquet. The emperor was gravely ill. Then I shall choose a new ruler for Great Liang. When Wei Shi was captured by the steppe tribes, I deliberately sent a letter to the great steppe's first prince, Changmu. In that letter, I detailed how, 1 year ago, the princess they had sent for a political marriage had died mysteriously in Great Liang. That princess was Changmu's beloved younger sister, his full-blood sibling. She had inexplicably died the day before she was to marry Wei Shi. In my past life, when I was being tortured in the dark chamber of the Eastern Palace, Yi Zi boasted about this matter to me with smug satisfaction. She said Wei Shi would never marry any woman other than her. That princess was strangled to death, her life snuffed out like a delicate flower. That was Wei Shi's doing. A year ago, the grassland people sent a princess for a political marriage, hoping to be exempt from the annual tribute. But on the night before the wedding, that princess died. The Great Liang court insisted that the grassland princess perished in a fire at the post station and that the one who accidentally set the fire was her own attendant. After the incident, the emperor was enraged and sentenced the attendant to death by extreme punishment. And with that, the truth was buried. Wei Shi even put on a show, requesting an imperial decree to waive 2 years of tribute for the grassland people. Changmu had long suspected something, but without evidence, he had no grounds to challenge Great Liang. Of course, the crown prince of the grassland wouldn't blindly believe my letter. Upon receiving it, he would certainly send a message via carrier pigeon to their spies hidden in the capital. A little over a month ago, there was a theft in the Eastern Palace, yet no gold, silver, or jewels were taken. Instead, beneath the golden osmanthus tree in a secluded courtyard, a decayed female corpse was unearthed. I returned to the residence granted to me by the emperor and waited for the situation to unfold. But the moment I stepped into the main courtyard, I saw someone I shouldn't have seen. A young man stood in the middle of the courtyard, unshackled and unchained, his tall frame appearing even more upright and imposing. I was puzzled. Yes, in the end, I had relented and pleaded with the second prince to substitute a death row prisoner for a G, sparing him from execution. But by now, he should have been far away from the capital. The emperor was furious today. When he lashes out later, "The general let me go. Who will be your scapegoat then?" The young man curled his lips into a smirk and stepped toward me, one slow step at a time. A sudden anger flared in me, and I struck him hard across the face. His head tilted from the force, a trickle of blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. Yet he still looked at me with a smile. "Let a G stay, all right? A G has no grand ambitions, General Jijia. You shouldn't be like a snake-bitten man who fears every rope for 10 years. I froze. On the journey back to the capital, I had confided in Ma Zi and Hulu about my rebirth. Though it sounded like a wild fantasy, they had believed me without question. I hadn't expected him to know as well. "You have no right to negotiate with me. Staying by my side. Aren't you afraid that if I'm in a bad mood, I might just kill you, a spy?" I deliberately emphasized the word spy. "Ji Changing," I said coldly. "Your mother's surname was Ji. She was a slave captured by the grassland people and later became the favored consort of their king, giving birth to you. Your half-brother Changmu looks down on you, refuses to acknowledge your existence. Your father treats you with indifference, allowing Changmu to order you around like a mere servant. I'm guessing Changmu made you a promise before sending you here. A high-ranking position? A fortune in gold and silver? So you hid by my side, waiting for the outcome of Wei Shi's matter. Once the dust settled, you were to make your move, weren't you?" I stared at him, watching as my words drained the color from his face. The grassland isn't the only one with spies in the capital. I've spent years at the border. Do you think Great Liang wouldn't have its own informants among the grassland people? But I've investigated you. You have no inner strength, and while your martial skills are decent, they're not enough to kill me. Still, given time, an opportunity might arise. I won't keep a hidden threat by my side. Letting you go, is already my greatest mercy. I came to kill you." He lowered his head, lips pressed together, and admitted it. But I couldn't do it. No one else would drape a cloak over my shoulders in winter. No one else would tell me that meat tastes better when it's fully cooked. He lifted his head, revealing a pair of wild, untamed eyes. "Now that General Shin knows my identity, that I was born lowly, what do you plan to do? Will you break my hands and legs and send me to my dear royal brother? Or will you sever my head and offer it to your emperor for reward?" One question after another. Yet beneath his seemingly defiant posture, I could see the sorrow in his amber eyes. I sighed. "I never intended to use you as a bargaining chip. Changing your blood isn't dirty at all, you know that? I have a man named Hulu in my tent. He's read quite a few books. He once told me about a line from a book. Are lords and generals born noble? So don't give up on yourself. The world is vast. There will always be a place for you." His pale face turned slightly red, but his amber eyes gradually dimmed. "Jijia, where did you learn to say such pretty words? I've never heard them before. Can you say them again? I thought you despised me for being dirty." I hadn't figured out how to respond when he locked eyes with me and, pushing his luck, said, "Then what should a G do to stay by your side?" "Pleasing you, would that work?" I could hardly believe it. How did Changmu raise such a cunning little wolf pup? His well-defined fingers clutched the hem of my robe as he lifted his gaze to me. "If one day General Jijia truly has need of it, then just discard a G." From his sleeve, he pulled out a dagger. I raised an eyebrow, suddenly on guard. He spoke earnestly. "General Shen, I'm giving you my blade. I grant you the right to use me." He flipped the dagger around and pressed the hilt into my hand. I took hold of it, momentarily dazed. Fair enough. The sharp edge cut into his palm, and blood dripped steadily onto the ground. I inwardly scoffed. Hulu's storybooks never had anything this intense. It only feels real when it hurts. "Don't abandon me." Like a wounded beast licking its wounds, he rested his head on my shoulder. Softly, stubbornly, he repeated himself. "Don't abandon me." It was difficult not to be moved. "How about we become sworn siblings? From now on, we'll share fortune and hardship." He laughed in exasperation, then bit my shoulder through the fabric. "Who wants to be sworn siblings with you?"
Ouch.
His teeth were sharp. One day later, the emperor summoned the high-ranking officials and declared that the crown prince had passed away due to illness on his way back to the capital. A malicious person had impersonated the crown prince to meet with the emperor, and he had exposed the impostor during a palace banquet. The emperor, bedridden, decided to change the heir. In the end, this blow led to the emperor's worsening condition, and he remained bedridden, ordering the second prince, Wei Zhou, to take over the governance of the nation. In my opinion, Wei Zhou may not be the most capable of heirs, but he is kinder than Wei Shi. In the past life, he was framed by Wei Shi's faction and was exiled in a terrible state. Before leaving, he tidied his clothes and bowed towards the north, sighing with emotion. "A good general has fallen so low. What is left for me?" Before leaving, he also sent trusted individuals to the border to deliver the remaining possessions of my family. This became Wei Shi's greatest source of distress. You both had an unspoken understanding. In the dark room, he gripped my neck and questioned, "Shenlan, do you regret not marrying the second son?" Later, he allowed Yi Ziyi's people to humiliate my parents on the border. The second prince had promised me that after I handled my private affairs, I could return to the border to lead the troops. As for my private affairs, they were no more than a few matters. On the night of the palace banquet, Yi Ziyi was brought to a private residence on the outskirts of the city and locked in a secret room. She had been starving for several days. She begged the guards to give her food, saying she would do anything in return. However, the guards were strict and said that their orders were only to watch over her, not to feed her. When I saw Yi Ziyi, her complexion was haggard, her cracked lips showing clear signs of not having eaten or drunk for days. The guards stepped aside. When she saw me, her face turned pale with disbelief, and she asked, "Shenlan, you've been reborn, haven't you?" She clung to the bars of the secret room, and her hands that Wei Shi had praised as born to play the guqin, were covered in bloodstains. I remembered that in my past life, it was also in such a dark room. Yi Ji had leaned delicately against Wei Shi's chest and said gently, "I heard that the pipa bones of a person can be used to make a guqin. Why doesn't your highness try removing hers and use them to make a good guqin for me?" I had no interest in chatting with her, so I ordered my brothers, start by cutting off her hands. When someone opened the door, she desperately retreated, shouting, "Shenlong, you're crazy. I'm the crown princess. If his highness finds out, he'll tear you to pieces." I scratched my ear and calmly instructed, "Gag her mouth, don't let her bite her tongue and kill herself later." Even though her mouth was stuffed with cloth, I could still hear her muffled cries and sobs from inside the room. After cutting off one of her hands, she fainted from the pain. My men splashed her with cold water to wake her up. When Yi Ji came to, there was a twisted hand on the plate in front of her. I looked at her kindly and asked, "I heard Missy has been starving for days. Why don't you eat? Is it not tasty enough?" When she saw the hand, she suddenly screamed. I pouted and said, "Seems like Missy is not satisfied with your cooking." I then ordered, "Make the next one into a roast, and add more cumin." When Yi Ji heard that, her mouth opened in pain, but she couldn't say a word. She could only mutter, "His Highness will never forgive you." "Are you talking about that Wei Gongzi who meets clients at Nan Phone Pavilion?" I asked. "He's living a much better life than you." The emperor was seriously ill, and Wei Shi still dreamed of holding the power of regency. The second prince, after all, was a kind-hearted person. He arranged for Wei Shi to meet the emperor in secret. However, during this meeting, the emperor only gave him 2 words. How can a crown prince of Daliang appear in public in such a disgraceful manner? There is no longer a crown prince of Daliang. Wei Shi, as royal blood, was secretly exiled. But when the wall falls, everyone pushes it down. The emperor's decree said that Wei Shi was no longer the crown prince. No one cared about the fate of a fake crown prince. Wei Shi used money to bribe the guards, asking them to release him. What he didn't know was that this was the beginning of his nightmare. A place worse than the cage of the Great Plains Prince was my dungeon. I made sure to occasionally let my guards be negligent, purposely letting him escape. Then I would capture him again and torture him. Again and again, his hopes were destroyed. After several cycles, even when I kicked him away, he would cling to the dungeon door, unwilling to leave. Until I grew tired of this game, I pulled out his tongue, severed his tendons, and sent him to Nan Phone Pavilion, a distant relative of Ma Zi in the capital. I was about to head to the border. My life shouldn't be wasted on these matters. Before I left behind trusted individuals. If Wei Shi ever tried to escape, I would personally end his life with a single strike. I had originally planned to bring Yi Ji along for the fun, but she was too useless. Even though I kept her alive with expensive ginseng soup, she died after only having her knee bone cut out. On the way back to the border, my soldiers looked at me strangely. Ma Zi and Hu Lu kept asking, "General, is there going to be a happy event in our army?" When they learned that I didn't intend to take responsibility for anyone or anything, they looked at me with disdain. I thought to myself, in this new life, I still had regrets. After all, a renowned general's achievements shouldn't be tainted by the company of men. Every time I kicked Ji Channing away, he would look at me with a pitiful expression. "General, use me or kill me. You can't escape from this." If this young man truly was a spy sent by Chong Mu to stay by my side, then I would wait for the day when the truth is revealed, lock him up, and make him suffer. The end.